It pays to have connections. I had nothing planned for Sunday night until I was asked if I would like to go to see some Chinese acrobats. The DRC, the body that runs the diplomatic compounds around Beijing, had put out a general invitation to the diplomatic community to enjoy an evening of Chinese culture. As the seats were on a first-come, first-served basis, and as I certainly looked foreign, it would be easy enough for me to get in with no difficulty. The brochure looked tempting enough. The venue for this grand gala was to be the Beijing Dongtu Theatre, but try as I might, I could find no mention on the internet of how to find this place. Another look at the brochure, however, showed a fuzzy picture of the Dongchun District Library underneath some red and yellow writing praising the agility, balance and strength of the performers. So I decided that this was where I should be heading. The library was easy to find, just 150 metres from Beijing Chao's subway station, which made life a lot easier. And sure enough, there were a number of Westerners wandering in through the front portals of this drab building. Using a technique I had perfected when I was in Saudi Arabia, I stuck in close to a number of families, and when asked if I had remembered to bring my invitation with me, I just told the doorman that I was with them, pointing in the general direction of about a dozen people ahead of me. Now, having been to a couple of other theatres in Beijing, where they take away your camera and even your bottle of water, I was surprised to see that here they practically insisted on not only giving you a bottle of water, but also chocolate biscuits and an Orion pie, a kind of chocolatey, marshmallowy wagon wheel type of biscuit. Mind you, they did later say that no photography was allowed. Loaded down with my goodies, I quickly found an aisle seat, for it's a well-known fact that Chinese theatres are not generous when it comes to the legroom department. Well, they say there's no such thing as a free lunch, or even a free Orion pie for that matter, so I was hardly surprised when we had to sit through a 10-minute presentation on how wonderful the DRC was, and about their plans for the future. Interestingly, the presentation was in both English and Japanese, which must say something about the influence that the Japanese have in diplomatic circles. Next up, we were asked to give a big round of applause for the assembled dignitaries. I have to say that the ambassador for East Timor looked especially fetching in her duffel coat, while the ambassador of Bahrain looked from her figure as though she was already an ardent connoisseur of Orion pies. Then we were ready to begin. Chinese acrobatics is said to have started during the Warring States period 2,000 years ago, though some claim it is 4,000 years old on the basis of the mythical Yellow Emperor Huang Di having started a martial form of acrobatics at a victory celebration in Wuchao, some 300 kilometres south of Beijing. Acrobatics became refined during the Han Dynasty from 221 BC to 220 AD, by which time juggling, fire-eating, knife-swallowing and tightrope walking were regular features. In the Tang Dynasty, 618 to 907 AD, acrobatics received royal patronage with shows performed for the imperial court, and soon spread to the gentry. But eventually the performance arts lost favour in the imperial court, and most acrobats performed on the streets. During the end of the Qing dynasty in 1911, it regained popularity, and after the founding of the People's Republic in 1949, the art form gained further respectability. Following the policy of let 100 flowers blossom and weed through the old to bring forth the new, there was a spectacular renaissance of the old acrobatic theatre. Troupes were created in each province and major city, and many were given their own theatres. The teaching was, and still is, done within the troupe, old performers training the new generation. Nowadays, more than 10,000 people are involved in the acrobatics industry across China. Children begin their training as young as 4 or 5, spending the first 2 years learning the basic skills such as dancing and tumbling before moving on to specialized roles. So it was not surprising that in the first act there were 4 young girls who can't have been more than about 10 or 12 years old being thrown bodily between muscle-bound guys who at the same time performed human towers and other acts of daring do. These girls were so flexible that they could bend and fold their bodies to a position where their feet clasped their face, while wrapping other parts of their anatomy around bits that were never designed to be seen in that way. The tempo, however, went decidedly downbeat after that, when we had 5 minutes of some guy juggling. The problem is that everyone has seen this 1,000 times over, so clever as it undoubtedly was, everyone was waiting for him to stop playing with his balls and make way for the next act, a collection of girls wearing silly hats with feathers, who used ropes to throw diabolos high in the air while turning cartwheels and generally throwing themselves around, before the diabolos followed Newton's law and were expertly caught by the girls, who would also juggle them between themselves and do other amazing things that you never imagined you could do with a diabolo. Maybe I've led a protected life up till now. By the way, the secret of doing somersaults with a silly feather sticking out from the top of your head is to grab the feather in your mouth before you do the roll and then open your mouth as you land to accentuate the overall effect as the feather springs back into place. Next up was a group of girls who had perfected lying on their backs with their legs spread apart, down to a fine art. They were bouncing umbrellas from their feet, turning them over and catching them with their toes, and then throwing them to one another again from their feet. I'm sure it was awfully clever, but after they'd done a number of variations of the same thing, it was time to move on to something a bit more exciting. Hoop diving, originally known as swallow play because the performers are supposed to imitate the movements of swallows as they jump through narrow rings piled upon one another, was next. The Chinese call it dashing through narrows, which just about sums up what it's about. Dead clever stuff. You certainly would never see me bouncing off a springboard, doing a couple of mid-air somersaults and going feet first through a bamboo ring. But then I suppose each one to his own. Chinese acrobatics took a nosedive during the Cultural Revolution of 1966 to 76, but it bounced back pretty soon afterwards as the government replaced the bureaucrats who were heading the troops with senior leading acrobats, thus further encouraging their artistic development. When China eventually began to open up to the West in the 1980s, the acrobatic art form was packaged as a complete theme show. Naturally, no acrobatic show would be complete without someone walking along a tightrope. Except the rope on this occasion wasn't tight, and it was more like a ribbon. But then, who's quibbling? Rolling backwards and forwards on a monocycle was of course de rigueur, as was doing a backwards somersault onto the wire. But it's a fine thing when everyone becomes so blasé, having seen it all before, that they get impatient for something a little different. The next act seemed like a good way of reducing the traffic on Beijing's streets. The group bicycling act went down a real treat with 10 girls cycling around the stage, doing things that would surely have made the bike's manufacturers cringe. Cycling acrobatics were imported to China in the 19th century, but the Chinese have made it a speciality of their own. The most spectacular figure in a Chinese bicycle act is, of course, the peacock finale, in which a large group of acrobats riding a single bicycle organize themselves in a tableau representing a peacock fanning its feathers. So eventually, all 10 girls ended up on one bicycle, as we just knew they would. But it didn't spoil the enjoyment as they tottered around the stage until the bike finally ran out of steam. It appears that anyone can learn the art of acrobatics given enough will and determination if they apply to the Beijing International Art School, formerly known as the Beijing Acrobatic School, the largest secondary art school in China teaching circus arts, martial arts, dances, and arts of other categories. The acrobatic courses focus on such skills as flexibility, tumbling, and handstanding, following which students learn to master advanced skills such as controlling their bodies, aerial techniques, tightrope walking, hoops, cycling, bowl cup balancing, poles, equilibrium, contortion, pyramids, in fact, just about anything you can find in a modern circus. Most acrobats practice Qigong, the Chinese breathing and mental art which helps focus attention and the body and mind to work in harmony, or so they claim. Graduates of the school have won over 20 golds from international circus festivals and have performed in over 50 countries. Many students from the Americas and Europe have graduated from the school and become professional performers. Not that you would ever catch me even thinking of subjecting myself to such torture. For starters, the acrobatic major has 6 days of study every week, including 4 days of speciality training and 2 days of academic study. You start each day at 6:30 doing an hour of exercises. Classes are from 8:30 a.m. to 12 p.m. and 2:30 p.m. to 5 p.m. and again from 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. and all for a mere $5,000 a year. Oh my God, the Chinese surely put masochism into a league of its own. Suddenly the whole show was over bar the shouting. It had lasted just an hour in total, and it was clear that the performers, as they made their way back out onto the stage, were pretty well knackered. One would have felt quite a heel demanding an encore. Instead, depending on nationality, the audience made a rapid beeline towards the exit as the performers carried on waving to a fast-emptying hall. The Americans led the charge, followed by the German contingent, while the rest of us carried on with the applause, since there was no possible danger of missing the last train. It seems a tough way of making a living, but as I say, I suppose someone has to do it. One thing's for sure, though, I'll never again complain about the physical demands of my job or the hours worked. Until perhaps the next time, that is.